everyone, this is Miss Geethanjali from the Department of Computer Science at Stella Maris College, and today I'm here to explain about the topic called as recommendation system. So a recommendation system is one of the most impactful application of machine learning and artificial intelligence, and we are going to dive deeper into this topic to learn about what we are using every day in our life. Let's get started. So here's an outline of what is going to be covered in today's video. So we'll start with learning about what a recommendation system is, why it is important, how exactly these work, and we'll also have a look at the various types of recommendation systems, and we'll have a look at how a recommendation system can be evaluated, and finally we'll wrap up with discussing the challenges that a company could face when using recommendation systems. So what are recommendation systems? So take a simple example where you go to a bookstore. Now imagine there are thousands of books over there and you want to choose something that you want to read. Now you could go ahead, search everything manually, examine the contents and choose a book, but that's going to be really time consuming. So the best thing that you could do is approach one of the booksellers and ask them for their recommendation. So they will probably suggest a book based on your preferences, what you like, you dislike, the genres or the authors you prefer, or even based on the content that someone else would have liked and had similar taste to that of yours. So based on these, the seller is going to suggest a book which you're going to buy. So that is exactly what a recommendation system is going to do. So a recommendation system or a recommendation engine or an algorithm is nothing but an AI tool that is going to suggest items that are tailored to an individual user's preference. So this can be used anywhere in a social media platform settings such as Instagram, Facebook, or any streaming services like Netflix or Hotstar, even product databases such as Amazon. So wherever you have large data to be chosen from, recommendation systems can be used over there. So next we move on to the importance of a recommendation systems. So listed out here are 4 benefits that a company could face when adopting recommendation systems into their business. So the first one is enhanced user experience. So your customers are actually going to discover a lot of new content, and more specifically these are the ones that are recommended by your algorithm. Now this is going to save the users time, and that time can actually be used to increase the engagement. So the time saved in searching and finding a content can now be utilized by the user to watch new content or spend on something else in your business. And this of course is going to boost the revenue for the business, right, in terms of the sales or in terms of the time being spent, new content being purchased, etc. And a very specific benefit, especially when it concerns educational setting, is when it concerns personalized learning. So here recommendation systems are used in a lot of online platforms which provide more highly recommended content for the students to learn. So here's a graph that shows the impact of recommendation systems being adopted across various industries. So as you can see, a lot of streaming as well as video streaming platforms have seen a rise of 70 to 75% in terms of user engagement, and a lot of e-commerce websites have shown up to 35% increase in their business. Now, how do recommendation systems work? So for you to know what is happening behind the screens, we'll first look at the process. So it's basically a 6-step process where it starts with collection of user data, followed by analysis of the data, and that is going to be used to make predictions and later on provide suggestions. Now the provided suggestions are going to be given to the user, and the user is going to give some feedback. Now this feedback is going to be used to refine the algorithm further. So let us have a look at what exactly happens in each of these steps. So when it comes to collecting the data can be collected in a lot of ways. It could be an explicit data, which is details like the likes, the ratings, the comments that we leave, or it could even be implicit data such as the clicks that we make, the number of shares, the number of likes, etc. Certain data such as the search queries that we use, or any filters that we apply, or contextual data such as the language settings or the location of the user, all these are going to be collected and used by the recommendation engine. Now the collected raw data is going to be stored in a database, or in case of a large data, a data lake or a data warehouse is going to be used. Now this raw data has to be processed, and only then the model will be able to use it in the next step. Now few things to note here are that the raw personal data is not going to be shared across. Only anonymized aggregated data is going to be used by the recommendation engine, as well as shared with other parties like advertising agencies. And all the data sharing is going to be governed by privacy laws. Now moving on to the next step, where the data is going to be analyzed. So here's a look at some of the steps that are going to be involved. It all starts with data extraction. So you pull out the data from the database, and you're going to perform some basic cleaning such as removing erroneous data or duplicate items in the records. And the data is going to be sessionized, divided based on the users, the groups, etc. And these data are going to be aggregated based on things like views, clicks, etc. Now once the data is grouped, these are going to be forming some patterns. So such patterns are going to be identified by finding a lot of similarities or correlations among them. And finally, all the patterns that have been identified are going to be validated. Now once this is done, we move on to the next step, where we use this data to make some predictions. So the data is then fed to a machine learning model, which is going to perform the task of prediction. And of course you're going to have a lot of items coming up as a list of recommendation, and these are going to be ranked or listed out based on the probability, and the ones with the higher probability are the ones that are going to be listed out first. And of course whatever items are going to be listed out have to be filtered according to the user's needs, such as contextual information like location or the language settings, etc. And finally these are provided as the recommended output of your algorithm. And then we move on to the next step, which is receiving a feedback. Now once the user gets the recommended suggestions, they are going to be directly using it, or sometimes they might prefer not to use the recommendation if they are not satisfied with it. So these have to be measured, whether the user is actually satisfied or not. So there are a lot of criteria for that, which will be discussed later. And sometimes our algorithms do make mistakes and provide wrong suggestions, so these also have to be properly accounted. So basically the user's feedback regarding the suggestion is going to be used to update the database and in turn retrain the model, and hence it's going to refine the algorithm. So based on the feedback, we are making improvements to ensure that any future suggestions that come are going to be much more better. We now move on to the types of recommendation system. So there are primarily three common types of recommendation system. The first one that we're going to discuss is content-based filtering. Now content-based filtering is nothing but the algorithm is going to analyze the features of items. So the item could be if it's let's say a streaming platform and you're trying to watch a movie, right? The features of the particular movie include the actors in it, the director, or the genre. So these features are going to be taken into account and likely be used to recommend future items. Suppose you've watched a couple of movies with a specific actor in it, the next likely suggestion would be another film of the same actor. Now, coming to the pros and cons of content based filtering. Content based filtering is one of the simplest recommendation algorithm, and the main goal here is that you don't actually require too much data about other users. It's only your individual data that's going to be taken into account, and therefore even niche items could be recommended. But the main problem here with content based filtering is, of course, a lot of details regarding the item has to be present. So um, if my algorithm is going to recommend a movie, it needs to have enough details about the movie, like the actors, the genres, etc. Right? Without the features, it will not be able to provide better recommendations. And another main problem that you could face here is the algorithm will not prompt you in a new direction to discover any new interests or new areas that you want to explore. So it kind of gets stuck in the same loop. So that's where the next algorithm comes into play. So collaborative filtering is a technique which is going to basically analyze the details or the behavior of other users and use that data to make some predictions. So imagine that 10 other people are going to watch the same movies that you're watching, right? So the next time you ask your system for a recommendation of a movie, it is basically going to analyze their data, what all movies they have watched, and likely recommend a movie which they have watched but you haven't yet seen. So this collaborative filtering is one of the most popularly used types of recommendation system, and this in turn is based on user data, or it could even be based on the data of the items. Again, when we come to the collaborative filtering, there are few pros and cons. So the main advantage here is this is going to likely suggest a lot of new interest, as it is dependent on the data of other people. If their interest vary, that is also going to have an impact on the items that you're going to get recommended with. And it doesn't need too much details about the individual items. Whereas when we talk about the disadvantages here, you do need a large amount of data, especially about what the other users in the system are doing. And when suppose if you're a new user to the system, then you're going to face a cold start problem, which is nothing but the algorithm will not probably know what to suggest for you to watch. So this could be likely because there's no proper data regarding your likes and dislikes, which the system could use to suggest content. And of course, popularity bias is one factor which could affect the content that is being recommended. Just because a lot of other people are watching the same content doesn't exactly mean that you might also be wanting to watch the same. So the third technique, which is a hybrid approach, combines the benefits of both content based and collaborative approaches. So here the two are interwoven and used to provide a much better recommendation. And a simple example as shown here is the content based filtering method based on the features of the items can be used when new users are concerned, whereas for existing users whose data the system actually has, can go for a collaborative filtering to provide with a lot of suggestions. Next, we look at how a recommendation system can be evaluated. To evaluate a recommendation algorithm, we are going to look at various factors that need to be taken into account. Now, all these are important as they are likely to suggest whether the algorithm is actually working correctly and helping the users in finding the right solution or not. Now, the primary criteria that is going to be used for evaluation is the accuracy. So, accuracy is nothing but how well does your recommendation system provide quality matches, right? And these matches that are being provided needs to be in accordance with what the users actually prefer. So that is one of the main factor. The other factors include diversity, which is how much varied content does your recommendation algorithm provide, and do the variety actually satisfy the user. And persistence is another criteria, and it has been shown that many a times reshowing the same item is actually much more effective than providing novel content. Privacy is another factor where the especially when it concerns the user data and their consent. Your algorithm must respect the personal data and it should not reveal all the sensitive content. User differences should also be taken into account by the algorithm when any suggestions are being recommended. So, especially demographic data such as the location, the language settings, etc., need to be taken into account and used to detect patterns and provide recommendations accordingly. And the recommendation system must also be robust in the sense it should be able to prevent any sort of uh, fraud or spam attacks. And the next evaluation metric is labeling and presentation. So labeling and presentation is one of the most underrated evaluation metric, as in the algorithm is going to provide you with a lot of suggestions. Now the labels that are going to be associated with these suggestions are primarily going to prompt the way the users react, and it's ultimately going to influence how they are going to use the suggested content. So a well labeled content that aligns with the user's taste is going to ensure that the content is actually watched or purchased by the user depending on the scenario. And if the labeling is not done properly, then it probably could result in the user skipping the content. So these are some of the evaluation metrics. Moving on to the challenges. Now, here listed here are some of the common challenges that a company could face when implementing a recommendation system. Now, the first one is data sparsity, which is nothing but the lack of proper quantity of data. Right? With very few data, you might not be able to come up with proper history or a background of the user, and therefore your recommendation algorithm will most likely fail in providing suggestions that are tailored to the user's needs. And data quality is another important factor. Sometimes just because there's large data doesn't exactly mean that the algorithm is going to provide quality suggestions unless the data itself is of good quality. Now, privacy and data protection are also another challenge that is going to be faced by the companies, because the recommendation algorithms need to ensure that users' privacy is respected and sensitive data are not going to be revealed and used for making recommendation. And a lot of recommendation algorithms end up with some sort of bias. So this could be based on a lot of factors, but the most common one is popularity, the presence of the quality data, etc. Now, bias is going to affect the suggestions the model provides, since the model is influenced by other external factors rather than being influenced by what sort of data it is actually supposed to be. And one of the main challenge a company could face is the cost associated in implementing and maintaining a recommendation system. So large companies, of course, it is easy for them, but if a smaller company is trying to bring in a recommendation system, then their business revenue needs to be adjusted accordingly. So with that, we come to the end of this video. So I hope all of you have gained a good understanding of the basics of a recommendation system. So it is a very powerful tool which can be properly utilized by companies to increase their business and also provide users with a complete solution to whatever they are searching for. And as AI continues to evolve, recommendation systems are going to become more complex, more adaptive, and more evolving. Thank you for watching the video.